Thank you everyone so much for joining us. My name is Sarah Fuchs and I am a Senior Specialist for the Community Education Department at MDA. We're thrilled to have you join us for today's webinar on mental wellness and self-care. This learning event is a part of our larger MDA community education programs, which focus on bringing the neuromuscular disease community together around education and resources. Be sure to visit the community education section on mda.org for updates on upcoming events. We are recording today's event and will be posting it to the website for on-demand viewing at a later date. Everyone who is registered for today's session will receive a copy of this recording in their email. So if you have to leave early, no worries, that will be coming over to you. Please know that all phone lines have been muted, but you can still ask questions. We'll have a Q&A session at the end of our speaker's presentation. Simply use the chat feature to type in your questions and we will be recording those. I want to take a moment to thank our sponsors for this webinar. We have Amgen, Amicus Therapeutics, MTPA, Edgewise, and Scholar Rock. For nearly 75 years, MDA has led the way in funding research to accelerate the development of new treatments, expanding access to care and clinical trials through the MDA Care Center Network, and advocating for access and inclusion for the neuromuscular disease community. MDA delivers its mission through research, access to care, advocacy, education, recreation, and engagement. Since its inception, MDA has invested more than $1.1 billion in neuromuscular disease research. Our MDA care centers are located at over 150 top medical institutions nationwide, providing care from clinicians who specialize in neuromuscular disease. MDA's advocacy network focuses on support for accelerated approvals and novel research, access to healthcare, accessible air travel, and more. This focus plays a vital role in shaping laws and policies that support the needs of people living with rare neuromuscular diseases. Our community education and recreation programs are designed to connect individuals and families. We are committed to building a nurturing environment where our members can share experiences, triumphs, and challenges. Every year, we offer over 40 educational programs, over 20 summer camps, and dozens of other community activities, both in person and virtually. If you haven't done so already, we invite you to join the MDA community by registering with us. Registering is free, and there should be a link in the chat. Now it is my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Brianna Mills. Brianna is a licensed marriage and family therapist in the state of California and Nevada. She specializes in disability, chronic illness, LGBTQ, trauma, and is certified in EMDR. She was born with a rare type of muscular dystrophy called SEPN1, which causes her to be a wheelchair user. She has been featured in many publications such as the Wall Street Journal magazine, Time magazine, Them magazine, and was a keynote speaker for Washington Association of Marriage and Family Therapy's Mentor Day. Brianna, thank you so much for being here today, and I will now pass the time over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully everyone can see this okay. Can you see it, Sarah?
Yep, it's all up.
Okay, great. Yeah, hello everyone. Thank you for joining. Again, this presentation is on mental wellness and self-care. My name is Brianna Mills, licensed marriage and family therapist. And so let's get started. Oh, first of all, what constitutes as mental wellness and self-care? What does that mean? Well, according to globalwellnessinstitute.org, mental wellness is the internal resource that helps us think, feel, connect, and function. So what are some ways towards mental wellness and self-care? Because there's a lot of different things that we could do here. Well, according to NIH.gov, there's a few things. One of them is activity and creativity, growth and nourishment, rest and rejuvenation, and connection and meaning. So let's go over what these mean exactly. So things like activity and creativity could be anything from art, music, hobbies, play, movement, physical exercise, things that can express yourself. Obviously, a lot of these things can be adaptable to however it fits your needs. Example, physical exercise, there's definitely a lot of ways that can be adaptable to you. Play therapy, art, music. It doesn't necessarily have to be actual physical tools. It can also be technology based as well. So for example, with art, graphic design, that's still considered a type of art. And it is a little bit more accessible to those who are considered disabled. But if you're able to do art, with actual tools such as painting or drawing, things like that, that's really awesome. And you can try that out too. Same thing with music. That's also a technology-based thing that you can try as well, that can be on the computer. Or you can actually play an instrument like piano or guitar, whichever. So growth and nourishment, things like eating healthily, healthy foods, fruits, vegetables, that kind of thing. Nutrition and supplements, so vitamins, just making sure you're getting all of the proper nutrition that you need, as well as nourishing your mind. So when people think of growth and nourishment, they kind of think, foods, which is part of it as well. But so is nourishing your mind. So, talk therapy, EMDR, which is a type of trauma therapy. Um, those are definitely ways to help nourish yourself because I see the mind and the body as connected. They're kind of one and the same. If you don't take care of your mind, then your body is going to react to that. And same thing with if you don't take care of your body, your mind is going to react to that as well. So they're kind of interconnected. Rest and rejuvenation. So things like meditation. There's all different kinds of meditations, and you can look some of them up. They even have like free ones on YouTube that you can listen to. Um, Mindfulness, which I'm going to go over a few of them later on. Mind body work. Mhm. So kind of focusing on your mind and your body together, because like I said, they're pretty interconnected. Also sleep. Sleep is very important. Um, Sensory grounding, which again, I'm going to go over in another one of the slides. Uh, so connection and meaning. This is family, friends, volunteering, and community, which I think is probably one of the most important things to focus on. Um, being a part of a group of people that you can connect with. Um, so there's more ways towards mental wellness and self-care. So some strategies for improving your mental health could be building resilience. So what does that mean? Taking time for yourself every day. Looking at problems from different angles. So say that, you might be struggling a little bit with stress and you're doing the same thing every single day and you're still stressed out. You're like, well, what do I do? This isn't working. Trying to think of a way to help with that by thinking, what are some different things that I could try? Oh, I haven't tried meditation. Maybe I'll try that, or breath work, or whatever it is that you're not really familiar with, trying something new. Um, Practicing gratitude is also another way of building resilience because oftentimes we kind of forget, a lot of the things that we already have. And it's nice to kind of think, well, there's some things that I really wanted in my life that I have now. And that's something to be grateful for. Tapping into social connections and community. So, like I said, trying to really find a group that you can feel belonging in, which I think is really important. Reducing stress. So, like I mentioned earlier, definitely getting enough sleep, exercising regularly. So, again, however that looks for you, making sure it's adaptable. If you can only do certain stretches, that's something, you know, at least you're getting some kind of movement. Um, Building that social support network, showing compassion towards yourself. So, this is something, again, same thing with the gratitude, right? Where we kind of forget to do some of these things, and practicing compassion towards yourself is one where we don't really practice very often. Looking at our situation, if someone else were going through that, I would hope that we would have compassion for them and say, yeah, that sounds really hard. That sounds tough. you know, I can understand why you would feel that way. But when it's ourselves going through it, for some reason, we often forget to give ourselves that same compassion. And seeking professional help, if you really need it. So, someone like a therapist to talk to and help guide you through issues that you're having. And I know, I know I've kind of said this before, but getting quality sleep. Um, Ways that you can do that, going to bed at the same time every night. Limit your use of electronics before bed. So this one I definitely struggle with. uh, I use my phone before bed a lot. So, that's something that you can try to practice not doing as often. Avoid large meals or alcohol before bed. Um, Also stimulants, so like nicotine, caffeine, that kind of thing. If you're able to limit those things before you go to sleep, that's a way to help with that. So, more ways, according to NIH.gov, healthy support systems. So, again, building strong relationships. Maybe if you have kids, trying to connect a little bit more with your kids. If you're a family caregiver, asking for help from others. Again, we're going to focus on that a little bit more in some of the next slides. Actually, asking for help because a lot of caregivers have difficulty with that. Uh, Join a group focused on a favorite hobby. So, in one of the next slides, I'm going to talk about some resources that you can have to find something like that. And volunteer in your community. So, one of the best ways to try and get connected with others is to volunteer, and again, I understand, some time constraints. Maybe you don't necessarily have the time to volunteer. But, if you do, then that's definitely a great option to try and get to know other people around you in your community. Coping with loss. So, oftentimes, if you are disabled or you're a caregiver, either way, you can cope with grief right? Sometimes people are grieving, and making sure you're taking care of your basic needs, talking to a friend. There's grief support groups there, um, that you can look up in your area. Um, Another thing is just being mindful. So, one example that I'm going to give for that, taking some deep breaths by breathing in for 4 seconds, holding for 1 second, and out for 5 seconds. This is a very simple, basic breathing exercise. It's supposed to calm your nervous system, and it's supposed to tell your brain, hey, you're not in any danger right now. You need to calm down a little bit. And so when you take these really slow breaths, you're kind of telling your brain, like, oh, I'm okay right now. I need to calm down a little bit. And I also understand, you know, me myself, I have a 17% lung capacity. So when doing breath work, I can understand that it can be difficult for some people. So make it adaptable to you. If you aren't able to breathe in for 4 seconds or breathe out for five, that's okay. Maybe you just breathe in for 2 seconds and breathe out for three. However it works for you, right? We don't want to force anything and make it seem like you're like gasping for air, right? Because that's the opposite of what we want. Mm. So that's just like a basic small example of a breathing exercise. Enjoying a stroll by noticing the sights and sounds around you. So, what I mentioned before about the grounding exercises, this is one of them. It's a sensory grounding technique. So, whenever you go outside and you leave the house, noticing what you're seeing, right? Trees or birds, grass, whatever that is, noticing what you're hearing. So maybe you're hearing cars or kids or, birds or whatever. It's just a way to ground yourself in the moment and be fully present. And that's by focusing on your senses. So, what you're seeing, what you're hearing, what you're physically feeling, like touch, what you're smelling, what you're tasting. So, that's kind of what sensory grounding is. And it just helps you bring your mind back into the present moment. So, again, mindful eating, that's another type of sensory grounding. If you eat or drink something, really focusing on the taste of it. What's the taste? What kind of notes am I getting, right? Is it tangy? Is it sweet? Is it salty? Um, is it hot? Is it cold? Um, things like that. Just really help focus on the senses. So why is mental wellness and self-care important? Like, why are we talking about this, right? Um, So it can help to manage depression, anxiety, PTSD, addiction, stress, all different kinds of issues, right? Um, and since the COVID-19 pandemic began, mental health has taken a huge downturn. So according to the WHO, the first year of the pandemic increased depression and anxiety by 25% globally, which is very huge. Mm. I'm going to focus briefly on the pandemic for just a minute, not too long, but since the pandemic began, a lot of people, myself included, who have muscular dystrophy, are still housebound because of the pandemic. Um, a lot of people that I know that have MD often struggle when they have any kind of respiratory or, virus kind of issue. And so it's really important for a lot of people with MD to take viruses seriously because it affects us a lot more. So I want to acknowledge, a lot of people that I know that are high risk or disabled um, are still housebound due to the pandemic, which definitely affects your mental health, right? You're not able to leave the house very often. It can feel very isolating and very lonely. Um, and disability specific concerns. So, a CDC study found that adults with disabilities report frequent mental distress 4.6 times as often as those without disabilities. So that's a huge amount, right? And that's understandable because a lot of people with disabilities, we have a lot more obstacles than people who don't have disabilities. And, of course, those obstacles are going to affect our mental health in one way or another, whether it's depression or anxiety or trauma or anything like that. So, when I mentioned earlier about resources, so when I talk about getting in touch with your community and trying to make connections with people in your area, meetup.com. So this is it's an app. I think you can also look at it online as well on your computer. But it's basically an app that you can, it sounds like what it is. You meet up with people in your area where you're located that you have a shared interest in. So, for example, on Meetup, you could find groups of people who like playing board games. If you enjoy playing board games, you can join that group and maybe they meet once a month or, every other week or something. And you all get together and you play board games. Mm. Or if you find a group where you really enjoy scary movies, right? I'm just giving like, random examples, but a meetup has pretty much, I would say, almost any group that you can think of where you have a shared interest in something. Mm. Some of the meetup groups you do have to pay for. So, for example, if you do decide to join a group where your shared interest is pottery, for example, that's just a random thing. You may have to pay to, to do the pottery. So, like you know, the supplies that you might need, things like that. So, some of these groups can be free. Some of them are not. So, it's probably going to tell you if you decide to join one, which ones are free and which ones aren't. And yeah, but that I think this is like a really great resource to get connected with people and have like some kind of common interest, you know? Um, openpathcollective.org. So this is a resource for therapy. If you're looking for therapy services and you are a very low income. So this is for people who are not able to pay a really, substantial fee. Open Path Collective offers therapy from $30 to $70 a session. So this is for low income therapy if you fit that criteria. COVIDconscioustherapists.com. So again, if you are still taking the pandemic seriously, this is a website of therapists that are, that still take COVID seriously. I'm a part of this resource as well. So, the reason why this exists, there are a lot of therapists out there who say like, oh, COVID's no big deal. It's a cold or a flu or whatever. And that can be damaging to some people. So this is why this resource exists. It's for therapists who still acknowledge that COVID is still a real issue. Massblock.org. So, again, I'm not going to focus too much on COVID, but this is a volunteer resource where you can actually volunteer in your community, and they give out like free masks, free tests, and free air purifiers. So you can actually volunteer in your area wherever you have one near you, and you can help with that. And you can also, use it as a resource for yourself. If you want a free mask or a free test, you can reach out and say like, hey, I need some, and someone will drop them off like literally to your door. So I think this is like a really great resource, either if you want those types of supplies, or if you actually want to get involved and volunteer that way. Hello-itsme.com. This is for making friends as well as dating specifically for disabled people. So it's for 18 years and older, but it's just a website that you can go on and you can make friends. You can date. Uh, I, I've heard good things. So that's another way that you can try and find friends and romantic relationships. Inclusivetherapists.com. So this is specifically geared towards people who want to look for a therapist where they specialize in LGBTQIA, as well as people of color. And they also specialize in the disabled community. The only thing is they don't know if any of the therapists on there are actually disabled themselves. So that's, if you're looking for something like that, I don't know if they offer that, but there are therapists on there that do specialize in disability, as well as the others, like I said, LGBT and people of color. So those are just some resources that you can use for therapy, as well as getting to know people in your community. So signs of emotional distress and how to cope properly. So I know that we're all kind of feeling some emotional distress lately. So mayoclinic.org is a list of ways that it will tell you if you are experiencing any kind of caregiver burnout. So this is just a list, and I'm going to go through it in just a second, but I'm just letting you know it's not something where you have to fit every single criteria in order to show that you have caregiver burnout. Even if you experience, I would say maybe just like 3 or 4 of these, I would think that that's a sign that you're experiencing some burnout. But I'm just going to go through some of them. So worrying frequently, feeling tired often, getting too much or too little sleep, becoming easily angry. So this one specifically, and I would actually say a lot of these, it often comes up when you're not really understanding why you're feeling this way. You could wake up one day and, like the worrying frequently, right? And you're noticing that you're worrying, but you're like, well, what am I worried about? You know, I don't understand why I'm feeling worried right now. Um, so the becoming easily angry part. Oftentimes when people experience burnout, when you're feeling a lot of these, it's very common to not really know why. And I think the reason for that is because we don't really acknowledge burnout very often, um, like as a society, you know. Um, we have trouble with, understanding what burnout even is. So, when we're experiencing these things and we don't understand where it's coming from, I, I might say, well, it sounds like you might be experiencing some burnout. Losing interest in activities you used to enjoy, feeling sad, frequent headaches. So, again, when I mentioned the mind and the body are pretty interconnected, that's one example of how that can happen. So, if you are experiencing burnout, you can experience some physical symptoms. Mhm. Because when you don't take care of your mental health, it definitely shows up physically, for sure. Misusing alcohol or drugs, including prescription medication. So, if you notice yourself kind of trying to numb a little bit, um, again, I'm not saying that this is definitely caregiver burnout, but it could be a symptom of something that you're trying to suppress. Um, and missing your own medical appointments and needs. So I think this is very common with a lot of caregivers, putting other people's needs before your own, which can definitely lead to burnout a lot quicker. Um, so how do we manage caregiver burnout? What do we do? So according to mayoclinic.org, ask for and accept help. And I know that, this can be really difficult for a lot of caregivers. You know, they're really used to putting themselves, on the back burner and asking for and accepting help is something that a lot of caregivers aren't used to. They need to take care of other people. And so actually saying, hey, like I need some help is not, it's it's very foreign, it's very uncomfortable, you know. But unfortunately, in order to manage burnout, sometimes we have to do things that make us feel a little uncomfortable at first. Focus on what you can do. So oftentimes, if you are a caregiver, um, you can struggle with feeling like you're not doing enough or feeling like, oh, I'm failing, right? Or, I'm not doing good enough at the things that I'm working on. Um, just focus on what you're able to do because at the end of the day, you're human and we can only do so much, right? Uh, Set realistic goals. So if you do have goals for yourself as far as managing burnout, and maybe it's, setting something a little more realistic, right? Um, Because if we're setting goals for ourselves that are not very attainable, well, then we're going to burn out even more, right? Get connected. So again, you know, using one of those resources to try and be a part of a community. Just really getting connected with other people. Joining a support group. That's another way that, you can try and get connected with other people. And take care of your health. So, especially, if you're not feeling good, uh, one of the worst things you can do is push through it. Uh, so, if you're like feeling sick, like physically, and you're like, oh, I have to go to work, maybe that, again, the first thing, asking for and accepting help. Maybe you need to ask someone, hey, can you fill in for me? Because I'm not feeling good and I can't do it right now. Um, it's one of those things where that saying, if you have to put your oxygen mask on before your child's, it's very similar in that way. You're not really able to help other people if you're not helping yourself. And yeah, just take some time for yourself whenever you feel that you can. Uh, however that looks for you. And we'll talk more about that in a little bit. How to manage burnout for disabled people. So, I talked a lot about burnout when it comes to caregiving, but disabled people get burnt out as well. So I wanted to acknowledge that. Um, One of the best ways to help with burnout as a disabled person is getting appropriate accommodations. So, for example, say that you get invited to a party and the party is all upstairs. Well, you might have to ask that person, is there an elevator? If not, then you either have to say, well, I can't go, or maybe you can ask that person, would it be okay if we did it somewhere where I could join? You know, because it's really hard to get invited somewhere and you don't have those accommodations that you need. And then you have to say, well, I guess I just can't go. That can feel really lonely, really isolating, you know? So it's really good to ask for accommodations. And again, I know that it's not always up to us. If you're disabled and say you have a job and your boss is telling you, hey, you need to do XYZ, but in order for you to do that, you need an accommodation. That's something where you're going to have to talk to your boss and say, hey, I really need this accommodation. And sometimes, certain jobs will push back on it, unfortunately, or friends or family, unfortunately. If you say, hey, it would really mean a lot to me if we did this outside because it would make me feel more comfortable. Um, some people can just say, well, I don't want to do that. So, that's unfortunately an issue that a lot of disabled people experience is asking for accommodations and not really receiving them. So that can really make disabled people burn out quickly, right? Because then we don't feel like we are being a part of society. And that's really difficult. Sensory soothing. So this one is geared more towards neurodivergent people. So people with autism or ADHD, um, which are considered disabilities as well. So, oftentimes people with autism or ADHD can have sensory issues. So, for example, say you are in a restaurant and it's very, very loud. Um, maybe you need to step out for a second. If you're feeling way too overwhelmed with a lot of the noise in there, you may just have to say, hey, I need a minute, and just walk out and stand outside for a few minutes, or maybe the lights are way too bright, or they're, flashing, or, like in a club or something like that. Uh, you may have to either say, hey, can we go somewhere else? I'm feeling really overwhelmed. Or, there might be some glasses that you can wear, like some sunglasses that can help dim the lights a little bit wherever you're at. So yeah, just making sure that wherever you are, you're really doing a lot of sensory soothing for yourself. Whether it is lights or sound or anything else. Healthy habits. So, for disabled people, it's the exact same, right? So making sure that you're eating properly, making sure you're getting enough sleep, you know, um, being connected as well with other people. Mm. I think that's usually an issue that a lot of disabled people have because, again, like due to the appropriate accommodations, um, it's a lot harder for us to get out of the house. So if we need to go somewhere in person, we may have to take the bus or the train, which can be really difficult. Or if you have a special van, you may have to wait for the person that's able to drive it to take you somewhere, right? So I know that, people with disabilities, especially MD, it's not always easy to, get those needs met. Um, but, just doing our best to make sure that we are getting those needs met and understanding boundaries. So this one is really important as well. I think between the caregiver and the disabled person. And again, I acknowledge the fact that when you have a disability, sometimes you're not fully able to have certain boundaries that you need simply because you're not receiving all of the care that you need. And so, I could give an example. Say that you rely on someone to help you, like a caregiver, go to the bathroom or, get fed or whatever. And that caregiver, continually shows up an hour late. Um, and, you have a boundary where you're like, hey, I need to go to bed at a certain time, or, I need to eat dinner at a certain time or something. But if this caregiver is the only one that you have, it's a difficult thing to set that boundary, right? If you don't have a lot of options. So I do acknowledge, especially for disabled people, it can be really difficult to set those boundaries when you don't have, like I said, a lot of options, right? But same thing for caregivers, right? You may not have a lot of options either. So if you have certain boundaries, um, it can be difficult to set them if you're the only one that's able to do certain things, right? So when we talk about boundaries, how to communicate properly about needs. So I think this is really important when setting those boundaries, is how to communicate properly. So these are called I statements. So according to Boston University, I statements, they focus on your feelings and experiences. And if you're able to express yourself in a way that doesn't attack or criticize or blame others, you're less likely to provoke defensiveness and hostility, which escalates conflicts. So these are what I statements are for. So there's 4 parts to an I statement, according to Boston University. So the first is observation. Second is feeling. Third is need. And fourth is preference. So giving a little template right here on the side. I'm just we're gonna go through, an example, but it just says when you blank, so your observation of what you're seeing, I feel or think blank. So state your feeling because, and then you're stating your need. So what it is that you need in the moment. I would prefer that blank. So you're stating what you would prefer happen instead of what's currently happening. So we're just going to go over an example. So let's try and fix this one. So instead of saying, it's rude of you to be late all the time, you screw up everyone's schedule, what do you think we can say instead when using that template for an I statement? Well, you can say, when you're scheduled to be here at 8:30, but don't come until 9, I feel disrespected. So you're stating the observation, you're stating the feeling. I feel disrespected because if you're not here, we can't start on time. So that's your need, right? We need to start on time. I would prefer that you arrive at the agreed upon time. So then you're stating your preference, right? So, using that template, kind of like a little sandwich kind of thing. You're just filling in the blanks of what you're observing, what you feel, what you need, and what your preference is. And I think the preference is the most important part because it's telling you how to change the behavior, right? If all you're saying is like, oh, I don't like this, stop, right? Well, what can we do instead, right? So that way things can change for the better, hopefully. Grief in the disability community. So this is something that I am very well versed in. I do a lot of grief work with disabled people. And I know a lot of people, when they talk about grief, usually it's about someone passing away, which is definitely a part of grief for sure. But there are so many different kinds of grief out there that it's not just about people passing. So, and I like to think of it as the cycle of grief instead of stages. Most people know about the stages of grief, which are, right here, denial, bargaining, depression, anger, acceptance. But I like to think of it as a cycle, especially if you have a disability, because unfortunately, when you're disabled, that kind of grief never truly goes away. I'm going to go over the cycle very quickly. So, experience. So say that you experience some kind of grief, for example, losing an ability over time. So I'm going to talk about something that I've dealt with. I used to use a walker when I was younger. So I used to be able to walk. And I lost that ability about, like 15 years ago, maybe a little bit more. So I've been using a wheelchair for the past 15 years. But I used to be able to walk when I was younger. So that is a type of grief, right, that I've experienced just based on being disabled. And I also want to acknowledge the fact that a lot of these feelings, the denial, the bargaining, depression, anger, acceptance, you may not experience these in that exact order. Mm. That's a little bit why I don't necessarily subscribe to the stages of grief, because it makes it sound like, okay, once you experience grief, the first thing you're going to experience is denial, which may happen, it may not. Everyone's different, right? So it could be denial once you experience grief, could be bargaining, could be depression, anger, could be any one of those. So it doesn't necessarily have to be in that order. Mm. But when I talk about acceptance, so a lot of people, when they talk about acceptance with grief, they think, oh, well, once you accept it, then the grief ends. It's over. You never experience it again and you're fine. Um, which I really, really wish that were the case. Um, but unfortunately, once you experience some kind of grief, whether you are disabled or not, I often think that that grief kind of sticks with you, you know. Um, so when I say acceptance, I'm talking about, you may have days where you wake up and you just don't really think about the grief. It doesn't come up for you. You end up going throughout your day just fine. Um, or maybe you might think about it and just, end up being okay. And that would be considered acceptance. But the reminder piece right here after acceptance, that's where the cycle starts all over again. So I'm going to give another example very quickly. Say that I'm writing something down with a pencil and I drop my pencil. When I'm writing, I'm in the zone, I'm, doing my own thing. And then when I drop my pencil, I can't pick it up by myself, right? I need someone to grab it for me. So when that happens, I'm automatically reminded, oh, I'm disabled. I can't get that myself. And then you're reminded, like, oh, yeah, the world isn't built for me. And then the grief hits you all over again. So that's what I mean by reminder. Some days you can go throughout your day and just, be fine. And something hits you and reminds you, oh, yeah, I'm, you know, I'm going through that again. And that can be really hard. You can experience the depression, you can experience the anger, the denial, whatever it is, it might hit you. And then you'll have to go through the cycle all over again. So what can caregivers do to help with the grief? Well, I'm going to go over some of the don'ts first. So don't say that it could be worse. Okay. Because when someone is experiencing grief, especially if you're taking care of someone and that person is experiencing grief, oh yeah, it could be so much worse. You could, there's so many other bad things that could happen, right? I mean, that is true. And at the same time, it does say, what you're feeling is not valid. And that can be really difficult. You're complaining too much. Um, which, again, is one of those things where some people, especially if they're experiencing burnout, they may not have the capacity to, really listen to someone. And you could take that as complaining. There's definitely a huge difference between complaining and grieving. And if someone's grieving, it comes off as very dismissive. Look at the positives. So, oh yeah, same thing as it could be worse, right? Oh, well, you have so much going for you and, look at all the things that are amazing. And yes, it's a yes and situation, right? Or get over it, you know. Again, these are all don'ts. Because of that, it's usually due to the fact that we're not validating that person's feelings. We're saying, oh, well, it's not that big a deal. What you're feeling isn't really that bad, you know? Some do's. So, what can we do? Listen and validate, right? Really be there for that person who's grieving and validate their feelings. Be like, yeah, no, I get it. I mean, that I can understand why you would be struggling right now. Ask how they're feeling or what they might need, because yeah, they may be grieving, but we may not know exactly what they're feeling and what they're in need of right now. Maybe they need to get out of the house, or maybe they need to cry a little bit. Offer support by being present. So, some people, when they're grieving, they just need a shoulder to cry on. They just need someone to be there physically present with them. Maybe you don't really need to say anything. Maybe you just need to be there for them. And trying activities to release that anger or depression. So I'm going to give like a quick example. Say that, you know, the person who is grieving, whatever they're grieving from, I'm going to give an example of just disability, right? So you can write the word muscular dystrophy on a piece of paper, and then you can rip it up. So that's just kind of a form of release for any kind of anger or depression that you're experiencing. It doesn't have to be muscular dystrophy, but whatever the grief is that you're experiencing, you can write it down and then rip it up. There's other ways to do that as well. You may have to, just make sure that you're doing it safely. So for example, like you could write that down and then burn it, which like, again, just be very careful. When you do something like that, you want to be safe, right? You want to do it in a place where, you're not like out in the woods or something like that. You're going to start a fire, right? Um, so just being mindful of like, safety aspects to it, but trying to do something to release that anger or depression that you're experiencing. Supporting yourself as a caregiver. So, as a caregiver, reminding yourself that you're human and you can't always do everything, and that's okay. And learning to come to acceptance with that. Take a 5-minute mindfulness break, right? So, even if it's just 5 minutes, just taking some time for yourself, take some deep breaths, drink some water, whatever it is, just take 5 minutes to yourself. It's so much better than just doing nothing. Let go of bad energy. So when I say shake it off, you literally can just shake it off. So one thing that I do in between sessions sometimes is I like, shake it off, like fluff it off on my hands, my arms, like, just any of that bad energy that you're experiencing. You can literally like, oh, just, shake it, right? Try to get rid of it in any way that you feel you can. Um, and check in with yourself periodically. So again, just asking yourself, like, what do I need right now? Oh, I need sleep. Okay, well, maybe there's a way for you to take a very brief nap, hopefully. So, asking yourself what you need. Overcoming boundaries to self-care. So there's definitely some boundaries, things that I mentioned before, especially if you're disabled. Time constraints is one of them. So again, I understand and I acknowledge that, we only have a certain amount of time throughout the day. Make time in your schedule if you can. So, even if it's just for, like I said, 5-10 minutes, right? Just carving out that time for yourself in any way that you can. Sometimes, and I know this sounds silly, but set aside dedicated time in your schedule. Like literally write it down in your calendar. Okay, once a week, I am going to join a book club. That I'm going to do that every Friday, you know, or it could be weekly, it could be monthly. Just writing down something in your calendar where you can actually take time for yourself. Because if you don't schedule it, no one else is going to, right? So you kind of have to be the one to do it yourself. Guilt and unworthiness. So again, oftentimes caregivers, they feel really guilty about taking time for themselves because it's not something they're used to. So try to challenge those negative beliefs. And again, this is also something that disabled people can feel guilty of too, not necessarily for taking time for themselves, but feeling guilty for having needs, which caregivers feel that same guilt as well, right? So if you're a caregiver and you're feeling bad for having needs, disabled people feel that exact same guilt. And so if you're able to connect with that, I think that's a really good way to share some kind of understanding and say, you're not a bad person for having needs. Same with me, right? Like if I need to take a break for like an hour, then I need it, And I'm not saying it's easy that we can all have that option, but it is a way to help understand, like, yeah, we both feel guilty for having needs. Cultivate that self-compassion. So again, like treat yourself with the same empathy that you would a friend. If a friend were coming up to you and saying like, oh, I feel so bad for, taking time for myself, you would probably say to that friend, like, it's a good thing, right? Like you need that. But for whatever reason, we tend to treat ourselves differently than we do other people. And that's not really fair. So the financial constraints, and I know, again, I acknowledge that a lot of people are hurting financially. We can't always decide to go, every time that we need a vacation, oh, let's just go to Europe. We don't always have that option, right? We can't just get on a plane and fly to France. So exploring low cost or free alternatives, meditating, taking a walk, seeing friends. You can try to budget for self-care activities. And again, like I know that not everyone can do that. I know there's people out there that, you know, live paycheck to paycheck and it can be really tough. So, if you're not able to budget, that's okay. Maybe just trying to find some free, low cost things that you can do. Um, Lack of awareness. So again, this is why we're here. Lack of awareness for not understanding the benefits of self-care. Some people just don't understand like why it's necessary, why we need it. So decision paralysis is another one. Start small. Some people, they think, oh my gosh, there's so many different options. I don't know what to do. Like, what do I start with? Well, just one or two simple things, right? So, like I said, going for a walk, right? Getting outside or going around the block or doing a 10-minute meditation or, focus on your needs by creating a self-care menu. So, what I mean by that is take some time to make a list things that you enjoy and do them when you can. So you can make a list on your phone of things that you really want to do. Try and do them whenever possible. Lack of support. Again, I know that not every caregiver has the option to just say, hey, I need to take an hour break, but it's one of those things where that's where community really comes in and is really helpful. Communicate your needs. seek out like-minded individuals that can be there for you when you need it. That's what community is all about. It's about being there for one another. It's about supporting each other. And be your own advocate, which disabled people know very well, right? When we're born with muscular dystrophy, we're automatically of the assumption that we have to advocate for ourselves because oftentimes we don't have other people to rely on. So we have to kind of do the work ourselves. And same thing with caregivers. You have to be your own advocate. Some resources for self-care. So there's the Calm app, which I actually think you have to pay for. At the top of my head, I don't know the price, but it has all different kinds of meditations. It has resources for depression or anxiety, like things that you can do, recordings that you can listen to. But again, I don't think it's free. So you may have to look up how much it is. AnnaFreud.org. So this is just a website that has different worksheets that it can give you to help with anxiety or stress or depression. So, things that if you want to actually like do kind of homework type things. Headspace is also another one. So again, that's just another app where it gives you resources for helping with stress and burnout, things like that. So these are my references. And this is my contact information. So this is my website, my email, my phone number, and this is all of my social media. And I am currently accepting clients in California and Nevada for anyone who is in need of therapy services. So thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Brianna. If you wanted to leave that slide up for maybe just a minute while I start the Q&A,
Yeah,
so anyone can, usually I do share a Q&A slide, but if you want to leave that up momentarily, then everyone can make sure to copy down your information.
sure.
And I recognize that we went a little over time today, but if everyone doesn't mind hanging out with us for just a little longer, I want to go over some Q&A because we did have some great questions submitted upon registration. So yeah, we'll leave that slide up for everyone. And Brianna, I will start going through some of these questions with you. How do I balance being proactive and not dwelling on my neuromuscular disease?
Well, I think it's really important again to try and get involved in community. So community-based efforts. If you want to get involved with MDA, I think that's really awesome. Um, if you want to get involved, it doesn't have to be disability related. It can just be, any kind of activity where, again, like you have that uh, shared, uh, what am I trying to say? Like something in common that you both have. Yeah, I
Interests,
think,
answers. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, so I think just, trying to do things where you're with other people because the more often that you do that, the less you're going to dwell on your disability. Because if you're staying home all the time and not really getting involved, then you're gonna dwell more. So
Yep, absolutely. That makes sense.
yeah.
Um, I know you kind of talked about this a little bit. What can a person with a neuromuscular disease do that has no help from family?
Yeah. So I know that in-home supportive services is a resource that you could possibly use. I know that I use that as well for my caregiving. It's a government resource, so I think it is connected with Medi-Cal. So if you are a Medi-Cal recipient, you can be a part of that service. Um, if you're not, I don't know, you might still qualify. I think you might have to call and ask about that. But that's just one resource that you can try to use because it's free. So if you need caregiving and you don't have the financial means to do that, so you can use in-home support. But other than that, you know, I mean, it might have to be like a friend or, maybe someone that is in your community that, maybe a neighbor or something. I know that it's difficult, relying on other people like that because it's not necessarily their role, but you know, trying to find that wherever you can.
Yeah, absolutely. More reason to try to get involved in the community and get to meet more people. And if someone needs in-home services too, that's watching, feel free to contact our MDA Resource Center. They'll connect you with some local resources, and hopefully get you started. I'm just going to do a couple more questions because I want to be respectful of everyone's time. Um, this question I thought was interesting. Our pet's love language is physical contact, which is a challenge with disease progression. Any creative ways to connect with our pets?
Hmm. Yeah, well, I think it depends on the pet. Um, Cats especially can be a little more difficult because, uh, they may only want affection a certain way. Um, or dogs, that are more hyperactive, can be a little more difficult. But if there's ways to, for example, maybe attaching something to your if you have a mobility device, say it's like a walker or a cane or a wheelchair, attaching like a toy to it, so that they can like play with you. Um, or, maybe having like someone, if you're able to ask them, hey, are you able to put my pet on my lap? Just to have that connection, again, like maybe the pet might stay there, maybe it might run off. But just having some kind of connection. Yeah, because I know, like, especially if you're in a wheelchair, it's harder to interact with pets unless they actually jump up on you. But if you're able to ask for someone to help with that, yeah, you can try that out.
I love that idea of attaching a toy to your device. That reminds me a lot of cats, and they also like to chase those little lights too. So that might be
Yeah.
maybe another idea. And then finally, I just want to ask, somebody said, where can we find disease-specific counseling or support groups? We will be linking something in the chat for some resources that MDA does offer. But if you had any ideas, I wanted you to be able to add to that.
Um, any ones that are disease specific, like when it comes to muscular dystrophy, I don't necessarily know at the top of my head. I mean, MDA, again, is probably a really good resource for that. But as far as support groups, yeah, there might, again, like you might have to do some researching. It is a little bit difficult, especially if you're looking for like a therapy group because it is state specific. So it needs to be like something, in your state. Um, Sometimes I do run groups, but unfortunately, it's only for California and Nevada. So, you may have to look for, someone who is in your state that can offer that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point, bringing out the state specific. And
Mm-hmm.
we have the MDA Resource Center that might be able to help with that. Or again, another reason to connect with your practitioner or your personal therapist or counselor. Because everyone has recommendations, so you never know what you'll find. Well, Brianna, I'm going to take over sharing,
Mm-hmm.
and I wanted to thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah.
And for everyone else, if you don't mind, I'm just going to wrap up and give you a little bit more information. We did talk about those resources that MDA has for disease-specific groups, so I will discuss that here shortly. And I'm going to begin wrapping up. Don't worry, it won't take that much longer. Again, thank you so much, Brianna, for being here.
Mm-hmm.
This year marks MDA's 75th anniversary. This milestone has been made possible by generations of dedicated support from people living with neuromuscular disease, their families, researchers, clinicians, volunteers, and donors who boldly drive our mission forward. As we look ahead, we remain committed to honoring this legacy, building on the impact we've made together, and continuing our momentum toward transformative progress for people living with neuromuscular disorders. To learn more, visit mda75.org. I want to be sure to thank our program supporters once more for helping us provide this information to the community. Thank you to Amgen, Amicus Therapeutics, Mitsubishi Tanabe Pharma America, Edgewise Therapeutics, and Scholar Rock. And before we wrap up, I want to be sure to tell you about some upcoming community education programming. First, MDA is hosting a webinar on understanding clinical trials and natural history studies on Wednesday, June 11th. This webinar will cover the purpose and design of clinical trials and neuromuscular disease research, the role of natural history studies in advancing treatment options. It will highlight key considerations for participants in clinical trials, including eligibility, risks, and benefits, and tools to find and evaluate clinical trial opportunities. There will be a link to register in the chat if you are interested. Next, I want to encourage you to connect with others in the MDA community by joining an MDA community group or participate in MDA's Next Step seminars. Community groups are supportive groups that provide a safe place to gather resources, interact meaningfully with others, and exchange valuable information with others in the neuromuscular disease community. MDA's Next Step seminars offer information, resources, and connection during critical life transitions, such as receiving a new diagnosis. Learners will be able to participate in small group discussions, hear directly from expert clinicians, and learn from others who are further along in their journey. So there should be links to those in the chat as well. Last but not least, we again invite you to join the MDA community. Joining is free and will help you stay up to date on our programs as well as the latest research. Please scan the QR code with your smartphone or visit the link in the chat. I again would like to thank Brianna for sharing her time and expertise with us today. We do want to hear from everyone who attended. What did you like about today's program? What can we do differently? There will be a survey that pops up when you exit the program, and your feedback is very important to us. If you have any additional questions or are looking for support or resources, please contact the MDA Resource Center at 1-833-275-6321 or via email at resourcecenter@mdausa.org. Well, I want to thank everyone for attending today, and this concludes today's webinar. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.